Note also na I uploaded the video from last time. Please say yes if you saw it or even tried to watch it. Just saw it because I mean I guess you guys were just you were here also, so you don't have to actually see it. Okay? And kindly unmute yourselves. Mas madali kung sasagot kayo, okay? So when you want to answer, just unmute yourselves. And occasionally, alam niyo naman ako gusto kong mag QA, okay? Para lang feeling ko na may kasama ako dito. Oops, wait. Nawala yun. Nakatabi yan, diba? Okay. Cool. Okay, so without further ado, we're in chapter 12. Chapter 12 has a lot going on it. There's a lot of details here that unfortunately we might have to skip a little bit. So a lot of work on your end would go a long way. But if you'll notice a lot of this at the end of chapter 12, and I think aabot tayo sa chapter 13 because chapter 13 is a little easy. So chapter 12 and chapter 13 should be doable, especially if you do some self-study on the derivations. It's kind of, yun yung problema sa mga macro models. Daming mga derivation na kailangan gawin, so you'll have to actually do it yourselves. Expect that you'll have to do some derivation also for the long test. So I'll point out here all of the derivations that the textbook wants you to do. So make sure that you're able to do it. Okay? So if there are no further questions, let's continue. This now we're trying to move beyond a pure endowment economy, and we're putting in a proper supply side through firms. And firms, as you know, from Solo, because firms Solo is all about the aggregate production function. Yeah. So now we're essentially going back to a version of the model with a supply side that uses inputs, capital, and labor to produce output. So output is no longer this endowment. It's gonna be coming from this market for labor, market for capital, and then market for output. Uh, the production, the products of the firm. What's also new here, possibly for you guys, especially if you haven't taken labor economics yet, you probably have not. There's going to be a labor demand function here, a macro labor demand function. So that could be super interesting and something that you might be interested in learning for, say, a labor economics class. Magkakaroon na din tayo ng investment. Oo nga pala, labor supply. I was really thinking about labor supply, which is an important factor also in labor economics. At the end of the day, guys, this will completely give us the simplest possible supply side that you can say is decentralized and is not immediately obvious like an endowment economy, wherein you just have endowments of Y or output or income, basically. Okay, so now we have a firm. So we say that there exists this representative firm. Okay, kind of like in Solo again. This representative firm produces output Y using capital K sub T and labor NT as inputs. Okay, everything that you learned in Solo applies here. Okay, all of the characteristics of the production function that you learned there applies here. Okay, so we're gonna skip all of this. This one, the first derivatives are of course positive. The second derivatives are gonna be negative. It is the cross derivative is positive. So that means that, for instance, one interpretation of this is marginal product of labor rises when capital rises with it. As an example. Next, you've got CRS. Okay. And then with CRS, everyone knows or should know that once you have CRS, you can turn it into a per worker production function. That's also possible. Okay. The Cobb-Douglas production function is what we'll be using, which is the following. Okay. Notice also that there should be an A here, A sub T. But then the A here is essentially gonna be outside of FKN, like this. Okay. Okay. So in the previous solo model, you'll have a couple of things, right? You'll have an A, which is a TFP term, which is out here, and you'll also have an E, which multiplies with your labor here. But for this one, we will forego the labor enhancing E and just focus on having this A, this total factor productivity A, which will come out, which will be here. So your Y will be A times this, the Cobb-Douglas specification. This 12.1 is just a standard picture of Cobb-Douglas. Everything should be obvious. The first derivatives, which are the slopes of this black line or the blue line, are all positive. Okay, but the slopes are becoming smaller and smaller, approaching zero, but never quite getting to zero. Okay. I think, oh, because we drew this, I think we already are finished with this. No, I forgot. So this is just the solo growth models law of motion of capital, right? And then we'll have two periods. Oh yeah, now I remember. Yeah, we definitely talked about this. So in the first period, okay, wait. So first of all, your investment will be funded by investment, by bonds, by government, not government, by firm borrowing. So whenever you see B superscript AI, subscript T, that's just how much debt the firm incurs to finance its investment, or as you say, investment is just adding to the capital stock. So your entire investment will be debt financed. Okay. So there are two periods in this model. Yeah, I'm remembering it now. Here's your first period. Notice that in the first period, your K sub T is fixed. So wala kang babayaran doon. Yung B is also something that you will pay for only in the second period. So wala ka rin babayaran dito. The only thing you will pay in the first period is your labor. And then whatever is left, that will go back to the household as the dividends. Okay. In the second period, you will also have your law of motion of capital, but your KT plus 2 is 0, which implies that your investment in time t plus 1 is going to be just consuming your entire capital stock at time t plus 1. Okay. So wala ka nang idadagdag sa t plus 1, wala nang t plus 2. Okay. Wala nang KT plus 2. So after incorporating all of that here, we've got your dividends in period T plus 1, the next period, the second and the last period. What are your sources of income? Your Y, your production, okay, which you will use KT plus 1, by the way. And then once you're done with production, anong gagawin mo sa natirang KT plus 1? By natira, we mean 1 minus delta goes away, remains, delta goes away. So ito yung natira, literally, 1 minus delta KT. You will turn this into output and then consume it. Okay. Then minus WT plus 1 NT, that's just your labor expense. And then 1 plus RT B super I subscript T. This is just your not just your interest payment, which is the RBI, right? R times B, but also your principal. Okay, your principal and your interest will be fully paid after one period. The value of this two-period firm is this one, right? This is your value. Your value today is just your value, your dividends today, plus your dividends tomorrow, pero i-discount mo siya by 1 over 1 plus R, present value. Therefore, your V, or the value of the firm, is just the stream of dividends that comes from the life of the firm. Okay. Then you will arrive at this value function. Take note that this should be, it's mahaba, it's involved, yes. And you should practice writing this down. That's my advice. But all of this stuff will be recognizable, right? What is this first term here? That's my first question. This A times F Kn minus Wn, what's this?
Sir, that's the dividend at period T po.
Exactly. That's the period of dividend period T. You can think of it also as period T profits, basically, or your operating profits specifically. Okay. And then the next period is, ano tong dalawang to? Yung naka-highlight. Yung A times F plus 1 minus delta KT plus 1. Ano yan? I suppose I'm also asking for not just ko ano yan, but more importantly is, how do you interpret that? What is the interpretation of these two things? What's the use of these two things? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
They are your future inflows po, future income.
Yes, future income. Ano yung dalawang yon? Name them specifically.
Yung
Dalawa,
output.
right? Go.
Yung output po din yung isa po is yung capital being sold.
Correct. The remaining capital, kasi 1 minus delta na lang yung matitira, right? Delta mawawala. Maglalaho siya parang bula. Pero yung matitira sa'yo is 1 minus delta. Yun ang ibebenta mo and then you'll consume it, right? And then, on the right-hand side with the negatives, those are your gastos. And you can interpret the dividends in period T plus 2 and plus 1 is also as your profits in, or your operating profits in period T plus 1. And the reason why they're called dividends is because ang dividend, in case you're not aware of it, ang dividend is yung profit from the firm that goes to the owner. Who owns the firm? Question, who owns this firm?
Household po.
The household owns the firm. But what's crucial here, guys, is while the households own the firm, medyo may pagka-schizophrenic siya. Like all of the macro models we've been doing before. So even though the household owns the firm, it does not actually direct the firm or own. I mean, it owns the firm, but it does not manage the firm. Okay. So it will get all of the profits, but it does not make decisions as to labor, right? Or how much to borrow. In the perfectly competitive model such as this, that sort of separation of management and ownership won't matter. But in other circumstances, and usually it will matter. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Usually, kung ikaw yung may-ari, you are also somehow involved sa management. And therefore, the decisions that you make on N and B will be not just increasing profit, but will also, you're thinking about it in terms of yung utility mo as the owner. Okay, which is not necessarily just the profit, especially if ikaw rin tong entity na to, right? If you're also the one being hired. Okay, so anyway, that's the situation. May households, I should say, that own all of this, and that's why may dividends to be paid out to them. And they are not the ones responsible for choosing N or investment, IT. But then the managers are, and then hiwala yung manager dun sa household itself. Okay. So what are the endogenous variables? NT, you choose NT. And you choose IT to maximize this 12.7. Ano yung mga constraints natin? Let's just jump straight to the constraints down here. You will maximize D1 and the present value of DT, D sub T plus 1, I should say, subject to the law of motion of capital, wherein yung I is the one that's being chosen, and I happens to be PIT. Which means actually, pag sinaksak mo siya dito, what you're really playing with is not just the N, it's not even the I, it's the B, right? Because the I is just the B. And then that's why what you're really trying to do here is choose the decision on how much to borrow, because how much to borrow is essentially how much you want to invest, which will bring resources into the future. This is perhaps the two important ones. The rest of the chapter, at least in this part, will go and simplify this. But once you understand 12.8 to 12.10, you can derive everything else afterwards. Okay. And let's go through the derivation very quickly here. So, ito yung law of motion for capital. But yung nangyari is, minove mo siya such that I yung matitira sa one side, then everything else is on the other side. And then this becomes I or B, right? And then what will happen next is you will just replace the this one. What is this? This used to be BI, right? And then the BI, you'll turn it into K and KT here, okay, which is your investment here. What happened is, imbis na I yung gagawin mong endogenous variable, or even B, you replaced B essentially with KT plus 1 minus 1 minus delta KT. And notice that choosing KT plus 1 is tantamount to choosing your debt on time t. In the same way, actually, as if this were a still I, choosing KT plus 1 is the same as choosing IT. Okay? Hopefully, people got that. And that's why dito, kita mo yung difference. It's now max NT and KT plus 1. Those are the two things that you are changing or deciding on as the optimal value. Yung KT plus 1 comes into play not in period T, ito yung period T dividends, but KT plus 1 really comes into play when? Dito sa second period. Even though you decide it in the first period. Yeah. You decide KT plus 1 in the first period. In the second period, it will come into play. It will affect your... Saan mo makikita si KT plus 1? Isa-isahin natin. What's this?
Sure, that's output po.
Output. So KT plus 1 will affect output for sure kasi capital is an input. What else? What's this? Okay, pinag-usapan natin yan kanina. Balikan nyo na lang. Basta it will affect this one also. Sigurado dapat alam nyo na to. Will it affect this? Yes or no? No, kasi wala siyang KT. Parang hanapan lang ng letter to, guys, right? This is NT plus 1 and not KT plus 1. Will it affect this term? Yes. Okay, can you interpret this term? What is 1 plus RT times whatever it is in the bracket? What's this?
Sir, it's the cost of what you've borrowed po.
Exactly. It's the cause of... Before, this used to be called B. Diba? But the B is just I. So essentially, by choosing a higher KT plus 1, say patataasin mo to, that means you have to borrow more. Your debt will be higher. The letter here is B. Your B is higher, and therefore, if your B is higher, you have to pay more because this term here will be larger. Okay? So the KT plus 1 really comes into play in the next period. Pwede kang yumaman, guys. That's why you want to have more, right? Dadami yung income mo next period. Pero next period, may babayarin ka rin. So, dito. Yeah? So, yun yung dalawang kailangan mong pag-isipan if you want to invest, right? Which is what happens in the future. Okay. Next, to find the value maximizing levels of N, T, and KT plus 1, take the partial derivatives of V with respect to each. So now you're gonna take, ito si 12.13, 12.14. First order condition, same lang. This is just the derivative of the value function divided by N, where N happens to be labor, right? And then boom, it's just this familiar term here. That makes sense kasi N is here and then N is here. May N ba dito? The answer is wala. Kasi in the future, hindi na siya NT. NT plus 1 ang kailangan mong pag-isipan. But this is about the derivative of VT by NT. So this is all current decisions. So this just says that in the current period, you will increase your N until the marginal product of labor, which is this one, equals your wage. Okay, which is the standard Econ 101, Econ anything in a labor class. This is the first thing that you're gonna get. Okay. And then you should all know how to draw this, right? This is a downward sloping line with respect to n. It will intersect W at a certain level, and that gives you your n star. Okay. Any questions about 12.13? Again, this is just an equation, guys. And then you have to equate this to zero nga pala. That's why I'm always talking about MPL equals wage. So unang question, the perhaps the more interesting one is KT plus 1. And as we said, KT plus 1 all happens into the future, right? So if it all happens into the future, then it's gonna be the product of 1 over 1 plus R times whatever's on the inside of the bracket here. And all of that will be equal to 0. Since the RT is exogenous, some number, this will never be 0. 1 over RT plus 1, that will never be 0. The only thing with a chance of becoming 0 is the one that's inside. Which is why if you equate this one inside to 0, you will get the following, which is just the marginal product of capital in the future, one period in the future. And then you're going to add 1 plus delta, okay, on the right-hand side. And it's going to be equal to 1 plus R, which is the cost of more investment. 1 plus R. So again, this has the same marginal cost, marginal benefit interpretation. Okay. If you hire one more unit of KT plus 1, what do you get? You have more output. Ba? Your income goes up by this much. Why does your income go up by 1 plus delta? Because yun nga yung natira sa'yo in the future, right? In the future, you will have at the end KT plus 1. Ibebenta mo yun. So if you increase your KT plus 1, you will sell more in the future, right? And that's why you will sell more by 1 minus delta, the remaining capital after you decide on KT plus 1. So the right-hand side is the benefit, and the left-hand side is the cost of increasing your KT plus 1. So any questions about 12.5 and 12.6? Okay. Please note that in an exam type situation, you'll be asked not just about the mechanical or mathematical derivation, which should be fairly easy, especially kung standard yung production function like CES or like Cobb-Douglas, right? But also the interpretation of it. Marginal benefit, marginal cost interpretation. Kung may question, kindly, yes, whatever. Carl, for everyone, naka-record to. You don't even have to go. This is like regular class. There's no attendance. Feel free to not attend as well. Okay? As long as may isang tao dito, magsasalita ako. Next. So you can feel free to read these two paragraphs here. And here's a labor demand function. Hopefully everyone was able to calculate or to draw from before. Okay. So this is just your standard labor demand function. W here is here because W equals the marginal product of capital. Okay. So you want to um, make sure that at any N that you choose, right, it will be equal to the wage rate, essentially. Okay. In equilibrium, right? In the optimal equilibrium. Okay. So 12.15, where's 12.15? 12.15, this one implies an optimal N, basically. Okay. An optimal N. Given your wage, given your TFP, A, and given your KT. Notice that si KT is fixed at time T. So parang exogenous na siya. So all of these ones are exogenous and WT is just the price, which from the perspective of this firm is also given because perfect competition tayo. Therefore, the demand for labor is just a function of these three different things. Okay, 12.7. Any questions at all about labor? And you'll end up with this. This is the most important one. Labor demand will be a function of these three things. In an exam situation, you will probably have to come up with an expression for labor demand. And one of the useful things of this 12.17 is tinuturuan ka kung bakit ganun yung itsura ng labor demand, number one. And second, what the expected signs will be assuming you have a marginal product of labor which is downward sloping. Okay. Next, we'll go on to KT plus 1. Okay, so 12.16. So you can read this. Essentially, it's the same thing that we've been talking about. This is the output and the extra capital in the future, and it represents the marginal benefit of an additional investment in period T. Simply says to invest up to a point in which the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. Okay. You can simplify it a bit and it will become this one, 12.18. Mawawala yung mga 1. The 1's basically cancel. So it's gonna be RT plus delta equals the marginal product of labor. Marginal product of capital, I should say. Okay. So let's think about the relationship between R, possibly delta, right? Although we're not super interested in delta. And the value of A. Okay. Suppose that R goes up. What has to happen on the right-hand side? This one will go up. R goes up because exogenous, again, from the perspective of the firm, R is some number that's exogenous, perfect competition. Delta is also some exogenous number. A is exogenous. N is not exogenous in time t plus 1, but from the perspective or of the decision of hiring one more worker, you're gonna keep this, you're gonna consider this as given to you. Like, let's say it's NT plus 1. Now, ulitin natin. If your left-hand side goes up, what has to happen to the right-hand side?
It has to go up as well po.
Correct. For 1218 to hold, the firm must adjust KT plus 1, which is on the right-hand side, such as to make the marginal product of future capital go up. Okay. Which means because downward sloping ang f of k, right? Positive siya, but the second derivative is negative. Then that means that you have to decrease your capital stock, KT plus 1, okay, to make your f of k go up. Okay. So that means negative yung relationship ng R tsaka KT plus 1. As R is rising, KT plus 1 must fall in order for the marginal product of capital to rise to match the increase in RT. Okay, so this equation 12.18 implicitly defines your demand for capital. Yeah. Implicitly kasi si KT plus 1 is nasa loob siya ng isang function right now. And you may or may not be able to invert it, right? But it doesn't really matter if you can or cannot. It's easier, of course, if you can. You can explicitly show this. But if you cannot, you can immediately understand naman the relationship. And the relationship will be that as long as your marginal product of capital is sloping downward. Ano pa? If your A is rising, guys, what has to happen to your KT plus 1? Bakit siya positive? Okay, so this is something that you can do algebraically. This is something that you can do graphically, but you should check and confirm that if AT goes up, then KT plus 1 must also go up. Now, let's use 12.19, the demand for capital, to think about the demand for investment, which is actually the thing that you're interested in. Now, spoiler alert, there really should be a direct relationship between KT plus 1 and investment at time T. Yeah? Because as we have already noted that investment at time T is the same as deciding capital and time T plus 1. So sana naalala niyo yun, right? Those are essentially the same decisions. Therefore, your investment at time T, the first two variables here will be exactly the same as this because inside here, this one is basically KT plus 1. These two things, they're both KT plus 1. Nadagdagan lang guys is this KT. Bakit siya negative? Okay, bakit siya negative? Again, holding RT and AT plus 1 constant or holding KT plus, well, not, holding these two things constant essentially. What should happen to your investment? Okay, what should happen to your investment as KT rises? So let's go back to the law of motion for capital. Should be easy to find it. This one. Okay. So we know that AT plus 1 and RT affect this one or control this. So we're not changing RT and we're not changing AT plus 1. Therefore, this KT plus 1 will not change. Okay? But what happens if KT goes up? What happens to IT? If the left-hand side here is not gonna change.
It has to shrink po.
Yes, para maging equal yung left tsaka right-hand side, pag tumaas yung right, itong 1 minus delta K, kailangan bumaba ang IT to keep KT plus 1 constant. And that's why negative yung relationship. Negative siya. Okay? Because like we said, these two things, RT and AT plus 1, that is KT plus 1. Okay. And if you hold KT plus 1 constant, and if you increase the past capital stock, then that means you don't need to invest as much because investment is just an additional capital that you want to go from KT to KT plus 1. And kung mas marami ka ng KT, then you don't have to invest as much. But should be super duper clear. This again is the demand for capital, which should be downward sloping. In equilibrium, this should equal R. And then there should also be a delta here, by the way. Yun yung nawala. There should be a delta here. Okay. Okay. So those are the two basic elements of this. A lot of it is helped because of perfect competition. Note that if you do not have perfect competition, you can still essentially derive practically the same things, except now that you have a more complicated expression based on this gap between how much you want to employ and how much you are going to change the price as you're changing your employment or your capital stock. We will largely skip 12.1.1. Merong results on debt versus equity finance. If you guys are business econ, shout out to the business econ people out there. If you're gonna take like a corp finance class or a financial econ class here, one of the topics, almost 100% sure, is this discussion of debt versus equity finance. The one thing that you should remember is just there's an irrelevance condition here called the Modigliani and Miller theorem, okay? Which they say that there's no difference between debt and equity finance. Therefore, the optimality conditions that we've seen here are essentially the same. Okay. So that's in this section, that's the only thing that's important, which is the conceptual idea na given perfect competition here and complete markets, there is no difference between debt and equity finance. The optimality conditions for the firm will be the same. First question, I guess, is conceptual again. The next question is conceptual again. What is equity? What does it mean by equity? So debt is easy because debt is literally something that we've been talking about for a couple of weeks now. Manghihiram ka ng pera and then yun ang gagamitin mo to finance something, to buy something essentially. And the next period, hopefully you'll have the money to pay for it because for sure next period babayaran mo na siya. In equity, we will pay for it now using the profits that we will earn now. So that's the only difference, guys, between debt and equity. And equity, basically, in the first period, babayaran mo na siya, right? Hindi mo nahihintayin yung next period na may 1 plus R, etc., etc. Babayaran mo na siya today. Okay, and that's what an equity is. Essentially, is you're going to the usual interpretation of equity is this. You will issue or sell shares of stock in the company. And ano yung reward? Why would someone want to buy it? Yeah. They'll buy it because they'll get dividends. So basically, the dividends will go to the new owners and will be shared with the new owners, and that's the idea of equity. And equity is basically the stock market. You're creating new shares, selling it. If they buy it, it's a way for you to finance your company. Okay, so yun yung mga stocks. Okay. The only difference, of course, is in period T pa lang, kasi namimigay ka na ng, or nagbebenta ka, I should say, not namimigay, nagbebenta ka ng equity, you have to already give them dividends from the start, from time T. Okay. Whereas if you borrow, you will start paying next period. Diba? To make it clear, eto yung dalawang dividends mo, guys. Under this scheme where Q% of your investment comes from equity, 1 minus Q% comes from debt. So let's say may mix ka, right? So this first period, ano yung nagbago? Ano yung nadagdag? Si Q, I. Q is the share of investment that is financed through equity. And the cost niya, its cost is minus I essentially, right? Per share, it's minus I. Because you have to pay it out from your current dividends here. Okay? Yeah. Meanwhile, in the future, 1 minus Q of your investment will be bonds. So that's why may 1 minus QI dito, which this one used to be bonds or B, right? So these are your bonds. Any questions at all about 12.21 and 12.22? The difference between equity and debt to finance your investment? Yeah. So other than this, feel free to go through the derivation. It's quite interesting. And if you're, again, if you're a business econ, you will probably have to do it at some point. And this is one of the easier expositions of what I've seen of the irrelevance condition. But it really hinges on, again, perfect competition and the ability to have the same R, or the real interest rate. Now, having said that, it will end with this irrelevance condition. It doesn't matter if you're 100% equity or 100% debt or some combination. The first order conditions that we've seen will be the same. Okay, any questions before we get to the household? We're actually done with the firm. Yay. Okay, households. So this is something that's probably could be new. I don't know if you've seen labor supply, if this has been a topic in micro. If not, this will definitely be the topic or the first thing that you will learn in a labor econ class. And this is sort of the classic, the easiest way to deal with it. Okay. All right. So let's say that your household utility is not just consumption now. It's going to include something called leisure. Now, I'm sure you guys understand what leisure is and why it's important. Okay. But what's important lang here, guys, in terms of the modeling is leisure, or L, is just essentially the reverse or the remainder from your time that you don't spend working. Okay. So one is the total endowment of time. So you normalize your endowment of time to one. So you can imagine the endowment of time to be like number of days, and then N and L will be like shares, or percent. So let's say that you spend 40 hours working, 40% of your time working, say. Then 1 minus 40% will be leisure, for instance. You can then think of endowment of time as available free time. Okay? So baka pwede mo nang bawasan dito yung you need to sleep, right? You need to have some time to yourself. Mga ganun. You need to, there's this period between being ready to work and being ready to have some fun, right? So you can like net it out. But overall, what this is saying is that you have a total endowment of free time here that you can use either working or in leisure. Okay? And hindi siya, what else? What do they say about finding work? One of the pieces of wisdom that I've read is you won't work a day if what your work is fun, or your work is leisure, or you have your dream job. Parang ganun. If you have your dream job, then you'll never work a day in your life. So in this case, this is saying we're not gonna assume that. we're literally gonna say that there's this thing called work, which is not leisure, and they're substitutes basically. An hour I can spend working is an hour less having fun. Okay? So that does not include like having fun from the work that you're doing. Okay, next. Let's denote this utility function by this CT times as a function of utility as a function of CT and NT minus 1 minus NT. Okay. So notice that these are shares. Okay. This is less than 1. Dapat. Okay. This is not going to be negative, right? This is not going to be negative. 1 minus N is going to be a positive share. What else do we want to assume here? UC and UCC, the marginal utility of consumption, has the usual signs. What about UL, or the marginal utility from leisure? We say that the marginal utility from leisure is greater than 0. So there's always a benefit to you from having one more unit of leisure, or one more, percent more of leisure time. ULL is negative, like UCC. So ULL and UCC are fairly similar in that case. UL is a derivative with respect to the second argument leisure. Okay. Here is an example of the lifetime utility of a two-period lived person, right? Here's your or household. This is your period T utility, which is both CT and 1 minus T. And this is your period T plus 1. And of course, here's your beta, which will be there to um, discount the second period. By the way, I just checked your homework, your assignment 2. Unfortunately, a lot of people, maybe because nag-Google lang sila ng CES or ng isoelastic, I should say, isoelastic utility. Yung ratio, yung MRS ng isang intertemporal model requires a beta there. And many, if not most, I would say most people forgot the beta in the MRS. Okay? Kailangan mo yon because you need the beta in order to compare marginal utility today versus marginal utility tomorrow. If there's one thing that you should remember, it's that. Okay? The only way you don't need the beta is if you're comparing two products today. And usually yan yung pag nag-Google ka, and I think I know how you guys were able to do it or get it that way, is because if you Google isoelastic utility, walang beta. Kasi you're thinking may dalawang products, X and Y. Ano yung elasticity of substitution nilang dalawa? But this is not just elasticity of substitution, it's the intertemporal elasticity of substitution, which requires a beta in it to compare the marginal utilities. May nagchat. What does beta stand for in the model? Okay, so ang beta stands for yung discounting mo of your marginal utility or your utility actually. I would invite the person who asked that question, si Joaquin Corpus, to go back to chapter 9. Kasi literally that's when we first introduced the beta, this beta here. Okay, but to remember again, I want to stress the most important parts of the book of the dynamic models are there in chapter 9, chapter 10. So pakibalikan lahat ng mga ideas doon, including beta. But let me just get to the punchline of the beta. The beta is basically will allow you to add today's utility and tomorrow's utility. Kasi kung hindi mo discount ito, kung hindi mo siya ginawang ganyan, hindi siya magiging present value. Okay? Because tomorrow's utility is tomorrow. Okay? And by definition, because you're impatient, the beta represents sort of this impatience. Therefore, you need to lower tomorrow's utility by a factor of beta in order to compare it with today's utility. Okay? And beta is an indication or a reflection of the fact that we want or we enjoy current consumption more than future consumption. Okay. So hopefully that answered that question. Please go back to chapter 9, chapter 10. There's probably a couple more paragraphs on what the interpretation of beta is. But essentially, it's a discount factor for future utility. Okay, so the example here, guys, will give you a couple of examples of what this sort of utility function looks like. 12.29 is just the ln utility function. And the ln utility function, maybe you didn't encounter this in your Googling when you were studying the CRRA, but the ln utility function essentially is the CRRA when the sigma is equal to 1. Okay. Next, but this is not strictly speaking the SCRRA because you have a second term here with a theta t as the coefficient. Okay. So this is not necessarily a CRRA. This is just what's called log flow utility function. Okay. For consumption and for leisure. What do we need? Okay. Let's think about this term here. ln1 minus n. If your n, what's your n again? What does n stand for? What is n?
Sir, time consumed in work po.
Time consumed in work. So if your n here goes up, what happens to 1 minus n?
1 minus n decreases po, sir.
Correct. 1 minus n decreases. And if you note the ln function, it's an upward sloping function. Okay. And therefore, if this one inside becomes smaller, then this one inside becomes a more negative number or a smaller number. Okay. So hopefully people can see that these are monotonic. As the one inside goes up, the whole thing will go up. And as the one inside goes down, the one inside will go down. Okay? The only thing that's nakakalito dito is the fact that it's in terms of 1 minus n. Usually, the thing that's inside, you're thinking about leisure. But every time we think about leisure, we think about the inverse of it, essentially, the remainder, which is 1 minus the labor, right? So that's one of the things that you should wrap your head around. It's not super obvious or nakakalito siya at first glance because n comes in with a negative number here. That means the more n that you do, the less happy, the lower your utility is. It may be easier if you replace this whole thing, this 1 minus n, with a capital L for the leisure, in which case your utility is rising in both C and in L or leisure. Okay. Theta here gives you the substitution between C and leisure. Okay. So theta need not be 1. For instance, if theta is greater than 1, you like leisure more than consumption. Okay, because your theta here is the weight for your leisure. Similarly, if your theta is less than 1, and notice that the coefficient of consumption is 1, mas mahalaga sa iyo ang consumption. Okay? So hopefully people are noticing that. Okay? Theta is a preference shock, right? High theta means the household values leisure more relative to consumption. May isang nag-chat. Yes, N is labor, but 1 minus N is leisure. Okay? And a lot of people, including myself, back in the day, nalilito ako sa 1 minus N kasi binabaliktad mo yung usual na alam mo sa utility function. Because the utility function usually is the more the merrier, right? The higher, the better. In this case, it's baliktad. The higher the N, the worse you are. Okay, and that's one of the things that you should remember because N is labor and what you value sa utility mo is your not consumption and your leisure. Now, hold on. Let me just get the tissue because meron akong konting sipon. Let me just come back. Okay. So hopefully you guys can do 12.30 to 12.34. This is just the derivatives that we've been calculating since before, and the derivatives that the book has been hinting at, right? Notice the signs, match the signs earlier. Here's the interesting part. What is UCL? That's the cross derivative between consumption and leisure. That means that consumption does not really affect the marginal utility for labor, or for leisure, I should say. See, nakakalito nga. Consumption does not affect the marginal utility for leisure, and similarly, leisure does not affect your marginal utility for consumption. So that's called additively separable utility. Okay. Now you can imagine this is not necessarily true in real life. That your consumption may be more valuable to you if you have more free time, or the opposite. Okay, but this one makes it simple, and that those two things that you value have no relationship with each other directly. No. So this is in contrast to, say, some marginal product of labor. If capital goes up, your marginal product of labor will rise. This is not the case here, right? Your marginal utility for consumption has nothing to do with your leisure. This is another example that is not additively separable. Okay, so this is the opposite of what we've been talking about in 12.30 to 12.34, which is this one. Okay, so this one will create a cross elasticity between consumption and leisure. We'll go through directly the computations here, and just want to go directly to UCL. Notice that this is not zero anymore, but it's negative. Negative. That means the more your marginal utility from consumption goes down, the more leisure you have. Okay. So this is a very specific idea of the world, okay, or of your utility. But that's what it means. Yeah. Your marginal utility of consumption will fall the higher your L is, or your leisure is. Okay. We see that consumption and leisure are utility substitutes in the sense that UCL is less than zero, right? This is in contrast to the production function relationship, where the higher capital you have, the higher your marginal product of labor. That means that capital and labor are not substitutes, but what's the opposite of substitutes?
Complements.
Correct, they're complements. Whereas leisure and consumption are, in this case, utility substitutes. Okay. Next, let's talk about the flow budget constraints. And other than utility, the flow budget constraints are probably the most important parts of these models, right? In fact, you can go a long way just understanding what the flow constraints are. So these should be super familiar to you at this point. Here's the first one, period T, 12.41. The left-hand side is always the uses of income. And the uses of income is either consumption or saving. Okay. What's the right-hand side? The right-hand side is, notice hindi na siya endowment. Wala na yung mga YT. Right? YT used to be just some number. But now, from the perspective, well, because of perfect competition, a lot of this is still exogenous. But what's important is this is now coming from also the firm in this case, and the fact that you own the firm as a household member, as a household, right? So the right hand side is your income from labor. Remember that you sell your labor to the firm, and they buy it for W. And also remember that you get dividends. Remember the dividends, the profit of the firm. You also end up getting that. Okay. So these two things together will give you your total income for which you can either use it to consume or to save. Sa next period naman, in the future, it's the same thing. You'd want to either consume or save. Of course, we kind of know the punchline sa ST plus 1. We're only putting this for completeness sake. But this one, in a two-period model, this one will be 0 for sure. Now, in the future, ano yung mga sources mo of income? Isa-isahin natin. What's this one? Okay, so that's just what you earn from selling your N. Okay, correct. That's what you earn from selling your N. And this one is your dividends from the future, right? The firm that you own will have a profit. Some of that will go to you. In fact, all of it will go back to the household. So this is like an aggregate household constraint. DI is something interesting that we haven't done yet. This is gonna be um, interest. I'm sorry. This is gonna be dividend payout from the financial intermediary. That's this one. Dividend payout from the international financial intermediary, which we label as the superscript I. Okay, so that's this one. So we will introduce a financial sector here, a very, very simple financial sector, which will be essentially our connection to the demand and supply for loanable funds. Okay, so that's this one, DI. Okay, the next period is 1 plus RT ST. Okay, what is this? Again, this is coming from chapter 9. Why do you have this as an income in the future?
It's the money you saved plus the interest you gained from saving.
Correct. Ba? In the future, if you saved, assuming S is positive, that will mean extra income tomorrow, right? But if you borrowed, that means that's extra gastos tomorrow. And S will be negative, and therefore there will be a negative number here. You might as well move this to the other side. So magiging sources or uses of income naman siya. Kasi you need to use some of your income here to pay for this utang there. Right? Okay, next. Again, ST plus 1 is 0. We've confirmed that. Don't need to belabor it anymore. Imposing each flow budget constraint holds with equality. One can derive the intertemporal budget constraint. Okay, so again, I invite you, go back to chapter 9, chapter 10. If you have not derived the intertemporal budget constraint, you must do it. This is just the same thing. Okay, this is just the present value of consumption on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is the present value of your income. So this is your income in today, and this happens to be your income tomorrow. Notice it has an extra DI here from the financial system dividend payout. But then you have to divide it by 1 plus R because you're going to turn that into a present value. So pareho lang yung interpretation. PV of consumption equals PV of income. The income side is more complicated, yes. But note that all of these are just given. Okay, meaning the household has no control over any of this D's. The thing that's being who decides the D's, the dividends, essentially, and as well as the dividend payouts, the firms decide that through the profits that they have. Okay, so the more profits that they have, the more dividends they will tend to pay out. So it's their decision to ultimately give you a certain D coming from this optimization that they're trying to do. So the household's objective is to pick CT plus 1, so these are their consumptions, and to pick NT and NT plus 1 to maximize 12.28 subject to the intertemporal budget constraint 12.43. And guys, this is it. 12.44 and 12.45. These are the two, this is the setup to the problem that you should either memorize for some reason, or if you don't want to memorize it, and I totally suggest this, you're able to derive it from first principles, right? From the flow budget constraint per period, flow budget constraint, and you're able to derive it. But this is essentially the maximization problem of the households. You can do a similar trick that we did in chapter 9, which is to replace out CT plus 1. And then it becomes this guy. Isang isang line na lang siya because you've incorporated the constraint here. What used to be inside here? Actually, it's this one. What used to be in here? What's in the highlighted area? What's in the highlighted part? I'm also having a snack. Okay, never mind. If you don't remember or you don't want to say, that's cool. You probably know what it is. So ultimately, your CT and your CT, your NT, and NT plus 1, yung nawala na lang dito guys is CT plus 1 because you've substituted it out. So you have those three things that you're gonna take derivatives of here. So note, paghanapan tayo ng letra. Okay? And that's all what this is, right? Because since everything is linear, you can literally count the number of times each of these three things appear. Let's start with CT. Where can we find CT? Is CT here in this first part? Your utility today? Answer yes or no.
Yes po, sir.
Yes, it's right here, man. What about here? In this first element of utility tomorrow. Is CT here?
Yes po.
Absolutely, it's this one. It's right here. But instead of coming in a positive way, it comes in a negative way. Okay, and there's a reason for that. Okay, because this whole thing, the answer to my previous question, by the way, this whole thing is actually CT plus 1. And there's a negative relationship between CT and CT plus 1 because of the budget constraint. So that's why my negative sign dyan. So if you consume more today, you must, assuming you're in your budget line, you have to have lower consumption tomorrow. Next, may CT plus ba dito? Wala, syempre, kasi hindi na yan CT. What about NT? Where does NT show up? Does it show up here in today's utility?
Yes po.
Yes. And here it shows up specifically as the negative of leisure. The more you work, the lower your leisure, the worse off you are utility-wise, right? So ayaw mo mag-work sana. So gusto mong bawasan maybe NT. Kung yun lang ang tinitingnan mo yung current utility. But what about here in the future? Where does NT show up? Does NT show up?
Yes po.
Yes. Where does it show up? Is it this one? Nope. Is it this one? Nope. Is it this one? Yes. So can someone interpret this one? And I guess more importantly is bakit hindi siya negative? Kasi before negative siya, ngayon hindi na siya negative. Bakit hindi siya negative?
Sir,
It's
that's
Go ahead, one person. That's fine. Thank you. At least some people are answering. Excellent. What is it?
sir, from my understanding po, yan yung sweldo mo from your work or your labor.
Okay. So bakit siya pumapasok sa future? Eh, yun yung anti-current mo yan, di ba? Ano nangyari? Ano to, back to the future? Tama ba yun, guys? Gets nyo ba yung sinasabi ko? Kasi time niya is t, correct? Why is it in the future utility part? The one here. The one after the beta. Why is it here? What's the story? This is basic chapter 9 stuff. Okay, so pag-isipan nyo muna, it has something to do with the budget constraint, yeah? So if it's here in a positive way. So in on the left side, current utility, ayaw mong mag-work. That's the point. Kasi may negative siya dito. But from the point of view of your future self, gusto mong mag-work ka kahapon. Because in the future, may benefit siya. Kasi hindi siya negative. So sana nagigets nyo yun, nakikita nyo yun. Okay? Na may trade-off of working today sucks, but having work today in the future is great because in the future you will have received the benefit of working yesterday. Okay? Now what about NT plus 1? Your decision to how much to work tomorrow. Is it here in today's utility?
No po, sir.
Absolutely not. Kasi the only things in today's utility are today dated things like C and N today. It should appear tomorrow. Tama? It should appear tomorrow. So, nasaan siya tomorrow? Well, nandito siya. Meron tayong NT dito. Bakit positive, guys? In fact, naka WT plus 1 and T plus 1. Bakit siya positive in the future? When you work in the future, it gives you a reward. What do you call that reward? Okay, it gives you a reward. Kayo na yung mag-isip nun, pero it gives you a reward. Okay? Pero if you work in the future, may problema ka rin. Ano yung problema mo? Saan pa siya? Saan yung NT plus 1? Dito. And if you notice, it comes in with a negative sign. Do you know why it comes in with a negative sign?
Kasi sir, you'd prefer to have leisure than work po.
Yes, from the utility point of view, right? So the direct utility effect would be ayaw mong magtrabaho because of this one. Gusto mong leisure ka lang. Pero may benefit kasi siya, which is nasa other side. In this side, okay siya. Gusto mong mag-work. So parang may dalawang, para kang schizo talaga. Para kang one hand on the other hand. On the one hand, I hate working because it means I'm not playing my game. I'm not, having fun walking along the beach, etc. But on the other hand, I like working because blank. And it's this one. Okay. So all of the trade-offs that we've been like hinting at right now are actually here in the first order conditions. Okay. Now I will essentially skip a lot of this because there's another version of the first order condition below. Also, my typo dito, guys. This one should be future t plus 1. This should be ct plus 1. This should be nt plus 1. Question: how do I know that? What in this first term here tells me that it has to be the future? And may nagtanong na, this was an item of conversation earlier. There's a certain letter that I'm looking for.
Yung data po.
Exactamundo, the beta. Okay? The beta is there. Anything that has a beta in front, that means you're treating it as a way to turn something into the present value. Which means to turn something into the present value, dapat originally hindi siya present. If that makes sense, right? Dapat yung minumultiply niya future. And therefore this has to be actually future. This is t plus 1 and nt plus 1. Okay? And then you'll see the correction here. The next one here, if you notice it, 12.53, ct plus 1 tsaka nt plus 1 na siya. So, ito siya dapat, right? So, typo talaga siya. Okay? Now, let's talk about 12.51, 52, and 53. Again, these are the heart of the household model. So, you should be able to, number one, derive it. Number two, if this was an algebraic expression, you should be able to solve for it. And then you should be able to understand or explain it. So 12.51, this is just the equation that we got in chapter 9. What do we call that equation in chapter 9? The optimality condition in chapter 9 for consumption. What do you call that?
Sir, is it Euler?
Exactly! Euler equation is always the utility max for consumption. It will tell you the growth of consumption over time. Always. Yeah? Okay, so this is the Euler equation. But now we have two other equations. Kasi may dalawa ka pang ginawa. May NT tsaka NT plus 1. What do you notice about this? What's on the left-hand side of 12.50? Sorry, nanahatching talaga ako. What's the left-hand side of 12.51? 52. What's on the left-hand side of 12.52? Marginal utility from what? This one.
From labor of today, sir.
You don't get marginal utility from labor, my friend. Nag-usapan na natin to. Where do you get utility from?
Sorry, sir, leisure po.
Leisure. Correct. So that's why L siya, hindi siya N. Kita mo yung may L sa harap. Okay. So, ano yung interpretation mo dito, guys? Let's say you increased your N. What is this, Bale? Or whatever. Doesn't matter. If you decreased your N. Kasi remember, yung N yung gumagalaw, no? Hindi yung leisure. So, gawa ka ng kwento. Let's say N goes up. What's the interpretation of the left side?
Sir, if N increases po, your utility for leisure decreases po.
Correct. So essentially, this is the cost of working. And the cost of working is the fact that you won't have leisure. That's why this is the cost on the left-hand side. So hopefully people got that. If you decide to work one more unit or 1% higher or something like that, your marginal utility from leisure will fall. And that is this term, the first term on the left-hand side. Ngayon, ano naman yung benefit, guys, if you work one more? Ano makukuha mo in exchange? That's the right-hand side. Obviously, kailangan. Kung yung cost nasa left-hand side, the benefit is nasa right-hand side. Pero ano yung kwento ng benefit na yon? So you worked more, and then what? What do you get when you work? Hint, it's this one.
Wage po, sir.
Absolutely. When you work more, you get a wage. Now, what do you do with this wage?
You use your wage for consumption po.
You will use your wage for consumption, and what else? Dalawa yun.
Or to save po.
Exactly, or to save. In fact, yun yung pinupuntarya dito. That's why you're multiplying it by 1 plus RT. Okay? You're multiplying it by 1 plus RT is because you're increasing your future consumption by how much? Okay, by WT times 1 plus RT. And that becomes your future consumption, CT plus 1. And what's the benefit of consuming more CT plus 1? What do you call this? Marginal utility from leisure or consumption?
Consumption po.
Consumption. Pero crucially, consumption when?
In the second period or
In the
future po.
future. In the future. And then kailangan mo siyang i-beta para ma-compare mo yung present to the future. Kaya laging may beta. Kung if the one side is a plus 1, then kailangan mo talaga siyang i-beta para ma-compare mo sa other side na present. Okay. So this is quite similar to the first Euler equation in the sense that the cost and the benefits here are all about foregone income, which will lead you to more consumption in the future. Which is the same. So Euler equation, ganun din. If you consume more today, then you will probably miss out on consumption tomorrow. This one is if you work more today, you will miss out on leisure, but it will transform into wages, which will transform into future savings, 1 plus R times whatever you save, and then which will translate into a higher consumption, which will mean a higher marginal utility in the future. Or not a higher marginal utility, a different marginal utility. Because remember, marginal utility is going down. So actually, if your consumption goes up, then your marginal utility goes down. But still, the benefit of a higher consumption is equal to your marginal utility. Okay? But the direction is, this is falling. The higher the CT is, the smaller your marginal consumption. Marginal utility from consumption is. Before we end, let's talk about this one. Let's talk about this one. Gawa ulit tayo ng kwento. Kaliwa. Kwento. This is about NT plus 1. Huh? Go. Let's say tumaas ang NT plus 1. You work more tomorrow. What is the cost? What happens to your utility?
It again decreases po.
It decreases. So the left-hand side is your marginal cost of working more, pero tomorrow na siya. So T plus 1. Ngayon, baka nagtataka ka kung bakit walang beta yan. Kasi yung nasa right-hand side, kailan nangyari rin to? Today ba or tomorrow?
Tomorrow po, sir.
Yeah. So basically, this left-hand side is tomorrow, a tomorrow issue. The right-hand side is also a tomorrow issue. Therefore, actually, you'll see it here in 12.50. May beta ka sa left, may beta ka sa right, magka-cancel lang yung beta. Wala nang discounting na mangyayari kasi same time period siya. Okay, pero ituloy natin yung kwento, final kwento. Pag nag-work ka in the future, you will pay for it in terms of foregone leisure. So this is what you lose in terms of your utility. But naturally, you will gain more because you will earn what? What will you gain in exchange? Your wage. Wage when? Tomorrow.
Future
Tomorrow.
po.
Future, right? And if you have a higher wage tomorrow, what happens to your consumption tomorrow? It will change, it will go up. And what is the benefit of that consumption tomorrow? It's the marginal utility of consumption tomorrow. Diba? So this is your classic, do I work or do I not work issue, right? If I work, then I lose out on leisure, but I gain more in consumption from the fact that I have more money. Does that make sense? Okay. So we will not be able to complete through all of this, but feel free, and you must. I'm gonna skip all of this on Tuesday. Feel free to read these paragraphs here. See, let us stop now, etc. Until next turn to the first. These are basically the explanations of the text. So feel free to read some of that, and those are very important as well. I would say specifically for 12.53, this works for T plus 1. You will know that if you combine 12.51 and 12.52, it will become a version of 12.53, but for time T. And I want you guys to derive that by combining 12.51 and 12.52, it becomes a version of 12.53, but in the current time period. Okay, so you will get that from the description in the text here. So starting Tuesday, we will start here so 12.55. And I'm hoping that we'll be done with 12 and maybe hopefully chapter 13 by Tuesday. Because the rest of this should be fairly easy, and maybe you've seen this in a previous micro class before. Any questions?
Sir, I have a question po.
Sige.
Until what chapter po yung sakop ng long exam 2 po?
Well, I'm hoping to finish all the way until monopolistic competition, but probably monopolistic competition will be for the final exam na. Okay, so probably all of the we're just moving from chapter to chapter to chapter until right before monopolistic competition. If we're lucky, kasama si monopolistic competition. If not, monopolistic competition will be moved to the final exam. After the monopolistic competition, we will be wrapping up GLS, doing the neoclassical model, mainly, and then we'll be doing the international macro. Don't worry about that because the international macro is essentially just a dynamic model pero iba yung mga actors. International economies na siya as opposed to national economies. Any other questions? Okay. So hearing none, that's pretty much it. Make sure to continue reading all of the end of chapter questions. Make sure that you're able to answer them. And then na-upload ko na rin nga pala yung scores ng second homework. Everyone did fine. Other than my observation na usually walang beta. But other than that, everything seems to be fine with intertemporal elasticity of substitution. All right, with that, with having no questions, I guess we're done. Thank you very much. See you on Tuesday. Bye. Oh, I'll be uploading this later. Bye.
Bye po. Thank you.